Today I'm going to tell the story of the day I met Robert Kennedy. I was a little child, and I absolutely did not have the context of how momentous Robert Kennedy's campaign stop in Indianapolis was. His brother, U.S. President John F. Kennedy, had been assassinated back in November 22nd of 1963. And Robert Kennedy was in Indianapolis on April 4th, 1968, which was the day Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. He spoke to an audience and urged them to remain civil, and he had told them how he had empathy for them because he had lost his brother who'd been shot down just like Dr. King had been. And this is known as one of the great speeches ever in U.S. history.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm only going to talk to you just for a minute or so this evening because I have some very sad news for all of you. Could you lower those signs, please? I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. He once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
And there was rioting in many cities the day Dr. King was shot. But I believe, and most people believe, that Kennedy really sort of healed Indianapolis and kept that from happening by inspiring them to continue King's legacy and not to tarnish it by acting in ways that King never would have approved of. And there's a monument in Indianapolis that's dedicated to Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And it's a beautiful thing. I visited there recently, and I'd never gone there, not really thinking, why have I never visited this monument? Because that's not like me. And I realized that I really had an emotional connection with Robert Kennedy because I had met him. And I don't think I really realized the depth of it until I visited that memorial and looked at it and realized that there was something subliminal or subconscious there. I just had never really wanted to go there because I didn't want to face that. But it's a beautiful thing. It's very inspirational. And I'm very happy that it exists. People should look at that. These were two men who had really sort of shaped the nation. And I never really understood the vortex of history that I was in at the time as a little child. I was innocent and naive. And I had always wondered too, because I'd never researched this, but Robert Kennedy had come to Indianapolis in the evening, I have read. He gave that address at this open area in the back of a truck. And then, as I read, he left the next day. So I'm thinking, when did I meet Robert Kennedy? Because I know I didn't meet him that day because it wasn't in the evening, and I can't imagine that. Because I remember the reception, there was kind of a happy mood there. And Kennedy himself was jovial to me, and I couldn't imagine such a contrast that would happen. How could he have been that way right after Dr. King was assassinated? So what I figured out was, after a little research, he did return to Indianapolis. He won the primary, and of course, he had cemented himself in the political and cultural and even spiritual DNA of Indiana by giving that address there the night Dr. King was assassinated. So he was coming back, and to great accolades and to great anticipation and great applause for his return and his victory. So that was actually when I met him. It was not the night that Dr. King was assassinated. It was when he returned after winning the primary. And I remember this big hotel was so fancy, I thought. It had these big, like, doors, and the handles were, like, clear, like glass. And I remember walking in, and I stood in line there with my parents. I remember I had this big styrofoam hat that had red, white, and blue stripes on it. I really was having fun wearing that thing. And I stood in line with my parents and finally got to shake hands with Robert Kennedy. And when I walked up to him, I said, "Hi, nice to meet you." I mean, it shows you how sort of innocent and naive I was. He smiled really big and he said, "Well, nice to meet you too." And then I made this like major little boy gaffe because I definitely didn't understand all or anything about politics. And I said, "Are you the president?" And he laughed, and not only did he laugh, a lot of the people around laughed who heard me say it. I mean, it was kind of, I wasn't even like aware enough though to get embarrassed by it. And he laughed and he said, "No, not yet, but I hope to be." So after that, he shook hands with my parents, and we kind of moved on because there was a line. And it seemed like the line led right back out again because there were so many people trying to meet him and shake hands with him that it would have like filled up the entire little ballroom there. So the people who shook hands with him were sort of led out in the same line. So it was 2 months later, on June 6th, that Robert Kennedy himself was murdered. And I have no memory of talking to my parents about that. And, just very dark times. To think that Dr. King was shot down, and just a couple months later, Robert Kennedy was too. And I really believe Robert Kennedy saw himself as, at least in some sense, as a man who was going to continue Dr. King's legacy. I really do believe that. I look back in retrospect and think what a huge impact and loss losing these two men had on us. I don't think it really be fathomed. I'm going to include parts of the speech that Robert Kennedy gave here in this little video. And you can see we were on sort of a trajectory to finally end, I think, a lot of the racial tension and prejudice and racism in the country. But these two men being taken out like this, it's as if, and I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but if you were going to fashion a conspiracy, if you were like one of these people in one of these time travel movies and you wanted to stop the progress of racial reconciliation and the end of racism in America in the sense that we've known it, then that's what you would do. You would send like an assassin back in time and you would kill these two men, because these two men were leaders that were inspiring us to move on from a lot of what had happened in the past and to become the country that a lot of our creeds and our philosophies represent: liberty and justice for all. You think about how the song says, "Crown thy good with brotherhood." These men weren't just paying lip service to that. They were demonstrating that. And they were playing it out, and they were really inspiring people to move in that direction. I mean, RFK was a real social justice warrior. He wasn't like these phonies today that seem to have sort of dysfunctional political agendas. He was really about more of a populist agenda, and so was Dr. King. And I think a lot of the impact that we lost to them can't really be fully understood. We can contemplate it and we know it's there, but it can't really be understood completely. It was a devastating loss for us as a country and as a society. What I remember most that day about Robert Kennedy is just how gracious he was to me, a little kid. A lot of people wouldn't have been, but he was respectful to me and talked to me like an adult. I can still kind of see the look in his eyes and how he laughed. And I don't think, like, I just want to say this again, the impact of losing Robert Kennedy, especially right after Dr. King had been killed, can't be measured. And today I want to honor his memory and say that we lost really a great leader. And really, after he was dead, after he was assassinated, I'm not sure we've ever had anybody on that level since he was gone. We had great leaders before that. But after that, I think the reality is our leaders aren't as authentic as these two men were, and it's just such a huge tragedy that we lost them.